Now that we have talked about some of the different components of our laptop, let's talk about hardware and device replacement. Now, one of the first devices that we notice when we open our laptop is our keyboard. Our keyboard can be removed in a couple of different ways. We have some keyboards which actually are removed simply by accessing underneath the laptop and pulling them out. And there are other keyboards which we can access through what I like to call the credit card technique, where you can take a small card and you can just take a laptop, and depending on the type of laptop board you have, simply going along the edge and removing all the plastic clips which hold it in place. With our different keyboards, we have different methods of taking them out, whether be the card method where we unattach it from the top, or some keyboards which require much more intensive removable parts and actually be able to get to the keyboard to remove it. Typically, our keyboards may be held in by some sort of zero insertion force cable or a ribbon cable that just plugs into our motherboard and that snaps into our frame of our actual laptop. If we need to replace our keyboard, we need to make sure that we check our manufacturer's specifications on how to dismantle our laptop. Check out any videos on our particular make and model of laptop, as well as order a new keyboard that exactly matches our make and model to make sure that we don't receive the wrong keyboard as far as shape, size or connections. Laptops also have different sized hard drives. Our hard drives can be anywhere between a 1.8 to 2.5 inches, and our smaller laptop hard drive, such as the one that we have here, as you can see, is much smaller than say our standard sized hardware. This 2.5-inch hard drive is going to be obviously much smaller. They'll fit into the casing, which may just slide directly into our laptop. It may have different connectors on the end than our standard hard drives too. Our 2.5-inch IDE or PATA hard drive actually have a 44-pin connector rather than a 40-pin connector. If you remember, our 3.5-inch IDE hard drives have 40-pin connectors on the end and a 40-pin ribbon cable with 80 wires on the ribbon cable. Our IDE for 2.5-inch laptop hard drive, however, has 44 pins. However, our SATA connection on our laptop or desktop drives are going to have similar connectors. Now, our 2.5-inch hard drives for our laptop may have some benefits for us over the 3.5-inch. Our 2.5-inch hard drive is going to be able to, some of them actually even perform stability support. They may be able to detect when there is too much motion and temporarily freeze the hard drive so that the extra movement doesn't damage the internals. 2.5-inch hard drives are sort of optimized for us moving the computer around. Our hard drive space for our laptops can be anything for a slide-in port where we actually just take the hard drive and place it in the correct type of dock, and we simply just slide it into the laptop. Now, these slide-in ports are helpful because if we ever need to replace the hard drive or access it, all we have to do is remove one or two screws and can simply slide it out. Other hard drives may not be as easy to access. Some may be buried under some panels on the backsides of our laptop. Some types of keyboards may actually have the hard drive buried under a panel on the front top of the keyboard. So rather than going underneath the bottom, we may have to just release some screws from the bottom and then go from the top in order to access the hard drive. It all depends on your particular manufacturer as to where they place the hard drive and how you can access it. So we should make sure that when we are accessing the hard drive, whether removing or replacing it, we learn where the hard drive is located on our particular computer, so we don't spend too much time trying to remove screws or open panels that don't have the hard drive when we can find it a lot quicker. Most of our laptops nowadays come with built-in speakers. These speakers allow us to listen to videos, music, anything that deals with sound. Laptops are sort of an all-in-one appliance. We have everything right there at our fingertips, so no need for plugging in extra devices. We can just take the laptop and we are good to go. So laptop speakers are differently located depending on the make and model. Some can be located on the monitor or maybe even be on the side of the laptop as shown. Speakers can get spoiled or damaged and may even need to be replaced. Speakers usually come in kits, which means that there is a left speaker and a right speaker, and they are plugged together to the motherboard, and it is possible that they might need to be rewired depending on where they are located on the laptop. it is good to keep in mind that our laptops have multiple surround speakers. They may have two, one left, one right, and then some on the lower side of the laptop, or some located up on our monitor. It really just depends on the particular laptop you have and how dynamic is the sound for that particular laptop. So before you replace your speakers, be sure to check the manual or documentation on your laptop in order to get proper instructions and information about your laptop. So when we are talking about the system board on our laptop, we are talking about our main motherboard. Motherboards for our laptops come in all sorts of shapes and sizes because our laptops are so dynamic as there are so many different types of laptops. Many of them have their own specifically designed motherboard just for their particular make or model. Now this, as you see, is a system board that we've already removed from our laptop. We can see all the different components on it, such as the components for RAM. We have different ports from where even our keyboard is connected, touchpad connections, CPU, and the north bridge and south bridge connections. They are all fixed on this small system board here. When replacing the system board on our laptop, it may be more complicated to replace than on a desktop computer. On a desktop computer, the motherboard is easier to access when we can open the side panel, remove some of the peripheral connections and just replace the motherboard. Whereas on laptops, there are a lot of parts integrated with our motherboard. We may have wire soldered into it that goes to different speakers, our antenna, our LCD screen that allows for a wireless to connect and give it a better antenna range. Our system board is one of those components that's really our last effort to keep our laptop alive. We have our laptop, and if we have issues and we are not able to boot, but the hard drive is good, the RAM is good, we check out all the other components and we narrow it down to our system board being bad. Our system board is probably one of our most expensive parts on our laptop when you're buying it in pieces, and when we purchase our system board, it is important that you take the decision of whether you want to go ahead and make the purchase, spend the time and money on replacing it, or whether it is just better to buy a new laptop. It really all depends on the price difference and how much time you're willing to spend on it. But when you do make the decision to replace our system board, remove all the plastic housings around our system board. Make sure that the power is disconnected and remove all the components, and always be sure that our power and battery pack are removed, because our battery pack can hold the charge and we don't want to receive a shock if our laptops accidentally turned on. So a laptop, just like all other computing devices, has a CPU, a processor. The laptop CPU may be a little more difficult to reach than our standard CPU on our desktop computer, but it is still possible. We can still make modifications as needed. Now we have our laptop CPU here that we've already exposed. We have gone ahead and unlocked the CPU from the zero insertion force socket. Once it is unlocked, lift it up with the special tools and remove the CPU. Be very careful while handling it. There should be no damage. This is, as you can see on our screen, is a pin grade array CPU, which means our pins are actually on the CPU itself. So replace it with care. When replacing the CPU, remember that we must align the gold corner with the other gold corner on the CPU socket. Replace the CPU socket and then lock it in place. Another aspect of the CPU is the heatsink and the fan. We have the heatsink and the fan. Both are attached by multiple screws. Let us go ahead and replace these. The heatsink goes right on the top of the CPU. Keep in mind that when replacing the CPU or the heatsink, you must clean off the old thermal plate paste and reapply a thin layer of new thermal paste, and then replace the heatsink. We already have our mounting bracket that we used, so place it back in that. And once we've replaced our mounting bracket back in, that'll hold the heatsink directly onto our CPU as it needs to be. Lastly, we have our fan which slides into its housing and then is also screwed in. Also notice that we have a power cable for our fan which will plug into the motherboard. Once we get that plugged into our motherboard, the fan will receive power and our heatsink will draw the heat away from our CPU and pipe it through the copper wire here. And then the fans simply blows out our exhaust over here. Overheating is a common issue with laptops. Say, if you are using them in places like on a bed where there's a mattress, or directly on your lap for a long period of time and blocking that exhaust port, we may notice that the bottom of our laptop gets very hot. There are additional solutions to that. If we know that our heatsink is functioning properly, our thermal paste is good and our fan is running, we can purchase additional cooling systems or place the cooling system on our lap, which go underneath the laptop, where there are additional fans that draw the heat away and help cool our laptop in addition to our heatsink and our fan, which is pre-built into our laptop. So this was all about laptop hardware, speakers, motherboards and CPUs. Laptops varies widely with its form, shape, etc. Some of them are even specific to that particular make of laptop. Now this is used to cause some problem with older laptops because it was harder to get memory for that laptop and in an inexpensive manner. If there's only one person who makes this particular shape of memory, then they're going to charge more than what they should. Nowadays we have SODIMM, small outline dual inline memory, and micro DIMM, which is dual inline memory, which are becoming the standard memory modules used. But it is important to remember the additional types of memory modules that we may encounter for laptops, depending on how old they are or which make and model they are. So we need to make sure that we are researching that particular laptop's memory requirement and the type and shapes that it accepts. Our memory modules are typically located on the bottom of our laptop in our small space as shown on the screen. All we have to do is remove the plastic panel that's inside, which we have our small dual inline memory modules which we slide into place. Make sure it is fit properly. The dual inline memory modules may also come double layered, so each of the banks have 2 layers of clips that holds it in, 2 in one bank and 2 in another bank. If we have these multi-layered banks, you must remember to remove the first layer memory before you can remove the layer that's underneath it. Let us look at optical drives. From our previous videos, we know that optical drives are drives which read CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays and are slightly thinner and compact than the other optical drives that we find in our desktop computers. Optical drives for our laptops have options that we can simply snap them in and out, or they may actually be built into the laptop itself. It all depends on the particular make and model of the laptop. If we do have a model where the optical drive can be slid in and out, then it could be replaced with as long as the laptop supports it. Optical drives need to be replaced, and a typical optical drive is held in by some screws underneath the laptop. We can simply remove those screws and slide out the optical drive. It should look something like this. Our optical drive is of a particular size and shape depending on the make and model. Make sure not to buy a part that doesn't fit or doesn't work. Be sure to check which make and model will work. Let us take an example. You will learn that notebooks and netbooks have very different purposes. Netbooks are for basic web browsing, typically not requiring much storage, whereas a notebook's purpose is to function as a portable computer where you perform browsing, data storage, data creation, analysis and other production-oriented uses. Therefore, netbooks have a small hard drive and they may or may not have an optical device at all. Most of our laptops that are being manufactured today already have wireless built into them. We use laptops on the go. We take them everywhere. We don't want to be tied down by Ethernet cables. That is why they have built-in wireless connections so that we don't have to get an external wireless card. Our built-in wireless cards for laptops can be accessed from underneath of the back panel as shown here. The wireless card can also be removed. These wireless cards are typically held in with our shrunken down version of a PCIe type connector. This is the wireless card for this laptop. It can be replaced if need be and is already pre-wired into our laptop. The wire goes up to our laptop into our screen in order to give it a wider range for its antenna, but if need be, it can be replaced. This antenna here is removable and can be removed just before we remove the card and put on a new one, rather than having to rewire the entire antenna structure. If you take a closer look, you will be able to see the make and model of the card, which makes it easier to identify and replace when required. You may even want to open up the laptop and find the actual model of that card to make sure you get the right one. In a case where you don't have a spot for wireless or you are using an old laptop, you need to upgrade to having wireless. Otherwise, if you don't want to go through the hassle of replacing the actual wireless card, an alternative is getting a wireless expansion USB. This USB allows us to just put it into the side of the laptop, and now that laptop can use the USB as a wireless receiver. Let's look at an example. This is a small external wireless network adapter. All this does is simply plugs into our laptop with a USB cable, and then when we install the proper drivers, this acts as our laptop's wireless receiver. There are USB versions which are a lot smaller and simply just look like large USB sticks. We then just attach it to our laptop and get them going on wireless network. Laptops actually have a mini PCIe slot. This slot may be used for different components such as our wireless cards. It allows us to use a PCIe interface while making it small. We must remember that our PCIe is basically our peripheral component that is plugged in, giving ourselves some options for expansion. We can use them to add graphics cards, network cards, additional sound cards. In our laptops, we may not have as much expandability. We may not have as many extra PCIe cards. But when we talk about using PCIe mini slots or mini PCIe slots, typically they are used on a motherboard for things like wireless cards and are already built in using those slots. But there are additional slots available in case we never need them. So this was all about memory and optical drives. Talking about laptops, we are talking about a form factor that's fairly smaller compared to our desktops. This means that we have less ports, we have less space to put the motherboard in, and we have less space for our memory. We have less space for our RAM. So instead of using a standard full-size RAM like you would do in a typical desktop computer, we use a RAM that we refer to as SODIMM. SODIMM. Now SODIMM stands for Small Outline Dual Inline Memory. Now we have a typical full-sized DIMM that we use in our computers. A full-sized dual inline memory. But when we are talking about a laptop, in order to get that in a smaller size and in order to fit that in a smaller space, we use our small outline or SODIMM. So let's take a look at our SODIMM. When we open up a laptop and take a look at our SODIMM, we see how much smaller it is than our typical RAM. Our typical RAM would be twice the width of this, but our SODIMM is about half the length. Now SODIMM comes in several different pin formats. We have our 100, our 144, our 200, our 204 and our 256 pin versions. So we need to make sure that if you are getting additional RAM for your laptop, it's vital to make sure that you're getting the right type. SODIMM RAMs also have types like DDR, DDR2 as well as DDR3 SODIMM RAMs. And we want to make sure that we're getting the correct version for our laptop. Our slots on our SODIMM RAM are different than the slots that we would have on a typical desktop motherboard. On our desktop motherboard, our RAM would just snap in 100% vertically, which is click right in. Our actual laptop RAM actually clicks in at an angle. We have a bracket which slightly pivots. We place it in an angle, and then our SODIMM RAM actually lays flat in our laptop, held by two small clips. So on our laptop here, we have slots from where I just removed our RAM from. And in order to replace this RAM, we will line up the pins and the RAM at an angle. And as you see, it lays flat. We've talked about having a flash memory before. And when we are talking about flash memory, we are not necessarily talking about the actual RAM that's in our computer. But we are talking about a hard drive that doesn't use any moving parts. Flash memories are also referred to as solid-state drives or SSDs. They are much like flash drives in the effect that they use a memory chip rather than having moving disks like hard disk drives. Solid-state drives allow us to save some space in our laptops. Solid-state drives are faster than our hard disk drives, but the downfall is that they are going to be much more expensive. There are many computers which, in order to sort of combat this, they have a solid-state drive, a small one, used to actually booting up the computer for installing the operating system. SODIMM, and then all the programs and all of the extra memory is actually installed on an additional hard disk drive which is in the computer. But day by day, every month, these solid state drives get a little bit less expensive, and in the coming years you'll see the price start dropping and larger solid state drives being used more and more in laptops. Our PCI cards say typically being replaced by a newer type of card, which we call express cards. Now our express cards, they are an additional expansion card that we can use, but they are a little bit different than PCI cards. One of the main differences is that express cards don't transmit using parallel. They use serial, which means that they are transferring bits one at a time. We've mentioned earlier how serial transmission is faster than parallel transmission because we don't result in as many issues with the one bit at a time transfer as we do as the multiple lane transfer that we do with parallel. You would think that parallel means you have more lanes so you can go faster, and serial is less lanes, you go slower. But the way that we can transfer information across in that single lane actually allows us to do it faster than if we were transferring it in parallel. So with express cards, we have what we call as serial bus. They allow us to transfer at 480 megabits when they are using our USB bus. Even though they are plugged into our expansion slot, they still may use our USB bus. The bus is the information pathways on the motherboard, and we have the north bridge and the south bridge which control these information pathway buses, and the different buses allow us different speeds depending on how they connect to the different north bridge or south bridge, how they interact with the CPU, and they are set up like on the actual design on the motherboard. When we are using the USB bus for these express cards, we are going to be transferring it at about 480 megabits. If we are using an express card that uses PCIe bus, then we are going to be transferring at about 2.5 gigabits. So our express cards here, they also come in a couple of different types. Express cards have express card /34 and express card /54. So we have /34 and /54. Now fortunately for us, their names are pretty helpful for us because the /34 means that the width of the card is 34 mm. So /34 means it has 34 mm width, and our /54 has a 54 mm width. The height of these cards that we are going to see with being how long they are, not length, but how wide they are going into the slot. The thickness of these slots is going to be 5 mm, like our Type 2 PC cards were. But we have 34 mm width and 54 mm width express cards. Their length and their thickness is the same, but their width differs. Our 54 mm slots that are on our computers may be able to actually house our 34 mm width cards because of the special knobs that they have to allow us to align them properly and to slide in a 34 express card into a 54 slot. But obviously, a 54 slot wouldn't fit into a 34 slot because of the size. A PC card converter allows us to convert one type of our PC card to the other by just sliding in the converter. Now again, this is a PC card converter and not an express card converter. Laptop is a small computer. As the name suggests, it can be used by even keeping it on your lap. Laptops have everything you would expect on a normal desktop, such as monitor, keyboard, etc., built right into it, and even comes with a touchpad. All of the different components that we need in order to use the computer on the go are all within the laptop. We have a built-in battery, the slots for adding sound cards, in case they are not already built in, etc. You can surf the web, watch videos, type up documents. Everything that we would need to do on a full-size computer can pretty much be done on a laptop. That being said, there are a couple of components of laptops which are kind of unique to laptops themselves. The components that are seen on other computers, such as on desktops, may be assembled in different ways, or they may be differently sized in laptops. So it's important that we understand those differences. When we were talking about desktop computers, we talked about the ability to put in expansion cards. Usually, these are cards that fit into a PCI slot or PCIe slot. In laptops, we also have the ability to add expansion cards, but these cards look a little different. Our expansion cards for our laptops look like the ones shown on your screen. Now we have two main distinctions between our two types of cards. We have cards called PC cards and PCMCIA cards, and also expansion cards. PCMCIA cards are older cards. PCMCIA stands for Personal Computer Memory Card International Association. Now PCMCIA actually closed their offices back in 2009. They are no longer regulate the standard like they used to. The standards currently upheld are by the USB Society. They uphold the standard for what certain cards qualify as particular types. Our PCMCIA cards, such as this one, are small cards which can be simply slid into the computer. Our laptops have a small slot on the side that has a plastic cover, and there's a small eject button that we push in to open the slot. With this button, we can take one of our PC cards, make sure it's oriented correctly, and just slide it right in. Make sure it stays in place. This gives us the ability to add additional ports and anything we may need for our cards. So we have adapters that perform lots of different functions for us, and PCMCIA cards use a parallel bus. We've talked about parallel in our previous videos, where parallel information travels in several different bits of information in parallel manner, whereas serial information travels one bit at a time. Another name for PCMCIA cards, we often hear them referred to as just PC cards. Now, in addition to them being parallel and being also called PC cards, we have three different types of cards, and they are referred to as Type 1, Type 2 and Type 3. Our Type 1 cards are 3.3 mm thick. These cards are the additional memory devices or RAM devices that we can plug into the side. So Type 1 cards are typically for memory. Our Type 2 PC cards are 5 mm thick, and these are the most common ones we see. They are the input-output devices as well as the peripheral devices. These 5 mm cards usually give us input-output ports that aren't full-size peripherals. Type 3 is an additional hard drive space, and so they are hard disk drive cards. Type 3, 10.5 mm, and act as additional hard disk drives, as well as additional cards with full-sized ports. So rather than having an adapter on the end and plug in whichever port, a lot of these Type 3 cards will have full-size ports on the end, such as our card shown here. As you can see, we have a full USB ports here on our Type 3 card. These were the differences between Type 1, Type 2 and Type 3 cards. Another thing to keep in mind about our PC cards is that they are considered hot swappable, which means that while it is running and while the computer is on, they can be taken out and put back in. That is what hot swapping means. All of these cards, whether they are Type 1, Type 2 or Type 3, our PC cards have been replaced repeatedly by the next type of cards, which is now the Express card. Screen actually can be replaced. You may encounter situations where screen becomes cracked or damaged, and that LCD screen, that portion which can become cracked or damaged, can actually become replaced. This LCD panel is typically held in by plastic around its edges. So depending on our make and model of our laptop, we want to remove that plastic in a way that's consistent with our manufacturer describes it being removed. Our particular laptop, we simply just want to go around the edges and remove our black panel here. Our problem here being we'd have to remove our keyboard before we can actually remove this fully. So we go ahead, and after we fully remove our black covering here, we can see that our LCD monitor for our laptop is actually just a removable component. Our monitor doesn't make up this entire structure here. We can actually just remove this monitor and get it replaced. Underneath our black component down here, which we would have to actually remove our entire laptop bottom in order to get to, because of the hinge structure that we have. When that's removed, we actually have something called the inverter. Now the inverter is a portion of our screen which sort of accesses the power source for our backlight, and it converts our DC current to AC current and allows us to get power to that backlight and make our screen show up. If our screen is cracked or damaged physically, what we probably going to have to replace is going to be the LCD monitor, the LCD part of the screen. If our inverter is damaged, then we may notice that our screen is very dim. We can't get it to brighten up. We can't get it to, it looks like it's not turned on. But if you look really close in a really dark room, we may be able to see a little bit of image on it. Then that's how it's going to be the inverter. Both the inverter and the LCD screen may be able to be replaced depending on your laptop make and model. You may be able to replace them separately. They may come bundled together, or you may have to replace everything above the hinge on your laptop. Again, it really just depends on your make and model. So you want to make sure you check out your GUI, your actual laptop disassembly guide. You take it apart depending on the manufacturer's specifications. Look at a video or two if you need to, and then order the exact same part. Get it replaced and get your laptop up and running again. Now our DC jack for our laptop is going to be where we are going to get the power from. On our laptop here, we have our DC jack for it on the back. Now these DC jacks may typically be soldered into the motherboard, but sometimes they are actually held in with a cable and connector. And say if this DC jack goes bad, or the pins break, or it gets misaligned, we may need to replace it or reset it. So what we want to do is actually remove our back panel and get access to where the DC jack connects into our motherboard if necessary. If possible, replace it with a cable. Sometimes, if they are soldered into the motherboard, we may need to get a professional diagnostic or unsolder it from our motherboard and to put it back on. But again, you'll always want to check your laptop. You want to make sure if you saw the warranty, if it's under warranty, or if you're the only one who's doing the fixing for the laptop, then you may actually have to remove your DC jack by unsoldering it from the motherboard and then replacing it with a new one and soldering it back to the motherboard. We always want to do this to these tasks very carefully, especially with our DC jack. It's what is going to give the laptop power. So we want to make sure that if it does get broken or if it does need a replacement, that we do that carefully and that we replace it according to the manufacturer's specifications. Most of our laptops we take on the road with us quite often. We take them from place to place. We don't always have an option to have them plugged in, so they need to have a battery. Our battery packs can vary in shape and size. For example, we have this battery pack that we just slide right into our laptop and it's ejected like so. But our laptop batteries can vary again in shape and size. We may have a nickel cadmium battery or may have lithium ion batteries. It really depends on which battery type we have and what we are using it for. Now our different battery types, lithium ion or nickel batteries, they may start to go bad. They may get to the point where our batteries are starting to die very quickly. Used to, we had a 4-hour battery life. Now we have a 1 hour, 30 minute or even few minute battery life. Then we need to get it replaced. Fortunately, we can simply go back to the manufacturer. We can simply go back to rent our manufacturer, or we can pick up the correct battery type depending on the make and model of the battery itself and just purchase a new one depending on if we want to get this another lithium ion battery, or if we want to get one. For example, this is a Toshiba lithium ion battery. We may want to get one that's exactly the same battery. We purchase it, get it in, replace it in our housing and just replace it in our laptop. Very simple to replace batteries in most of our laptops. Again, our low batteries. Symptoms for replacing a battery are going to be if we not certain not having a good of a charge, or if it continually dies over and over by just being unplugged for a few seconds, even with 100% charge that was on it previously. So our touchpad on our laptop allows us to navigate the mouse without having to have any sort of additional outside mouse. This is the small pad that we'll find typically right in the center of our laptop, and again it is a touchpad and they can go bad. Depending on our particular laptop, we may have to replace our entire front of our laptop in order to replace the touchpad, or we may simply be able to replace just the touchpad component itself. We want to read our disassembly manual, take apart our laptop and then remove whatever type of cable, maybe a ribbon cable that's holding in our touchpad component to our laptop. After we remove it, we simply purchase the exact same make and model of our laptop touchpad. Get it replaced in there. Get it up and running. We want to make sure that we have the exact same type of touchpad, because even if we have one that isn't exactly the same or may fit, just fits in a little bit, we push it in there and we get it to fit, and the cable connector fits right. We may not have the proper drivers installed for it on our operating system, and when we go to use it, it's not working quite right. So you want to make sure that we get the right type of touchpad. We get one that works with our system and hopefully replace one that's the exact same model to what we already have. So when we are talking about the plastics of our laptop, we are talking about our outside black panel around our monitor. We are talking about the front panel plastics, our back panel plastics, basically all the housings that hold our laptop together. Now these plastics can become scratched, they can become broken, can become dented, they can become very unseemly, and we may want to replace them as we can. We can purchase plastic kits from the manufacturer depending on the particular make and model of our laptop, and we'll simply want to remove whichever segment is unseemly or broken or cracked and just replace the plastic housing back onto the laptop. Now keep in mind that depending on our laptop, certain parts may be easier to swap than others. Our front panel here that goes around our LCD screen is fairly easy to take apart, or some of our back panels that cover, say, our RAM or our wireless card may be easy to remove and get replaced. But sometimes if it's, say, our main housing for our motherboard or the main backing for LCD monitor, we may actually have to do a lot more reconstructive surgery kind of in order to get these back up and running. That may even mean transplanting the motherboard into a new housing. So we always want to make sure that we are taking our precautions and keeping our motherboard protected and our components while we are moving them over to our new housing. We will be